Welcome to the Association's Futures Podcast, brought to you by Association Activision. We ask you to join us to discuss the future of the Association's community. How can we build and focus on the many futures we will see during these disruptive times? Let's get started with today's guest.
Welcome to Association Futures Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Butera. Today's return guest is Lindsay Currie, CAE, and Executive Officer at the Council on Undergraduate Education, commonly known as CUR. Lindsay is an association leader and believes in the power of foresight. One of the many things I like about our guest is her ability to strategically examine and address organizational challenges, engage in communities, and work with partners to accomplish goals. CUR is a small staff association that presents challenges and opportunities in the new ecology of the 21st century. Lindsay is a graduate of Rutgers University with a master's in women's and gender studies and holds a master's certificate in public relations from Monmouth College. She has a diversity, equity, and inclusion in workplace certificate from the University of South Florida. Join me in welcoming Lindsay to our podcast. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Michael. How are you today?
I'm just fine, and I'm so happy that you're with us today. Look, I want to start right in on this issue of the small staff association. You know, there are significant challenges that result from being a small association, and as I said, also opportunities. So how do you navigate this fast-paced changing environment of the new century, which now, by the way, is 25 years old, a quarter of it's already gone?
Yeah. You know what, Michael? It's a really fun and exciting time to be at small staffs. It is where I find my energy and my joy. I love working with small teams, although I feel like I'm cheating these days. We just added a whole additional staff position. And when you grow a small staff by one person, right, you're multiplying your capacity considerably. So when you go from 7 to 8, now I'm like, oh, do I still get to say small staff? Yes. But it feels so monumental for us. You know, there's so much going on in the world of associations and the greater world around us. And when you, I think, translate that to small staff, a lot of it gets amplified. For a long time, you know, in the association space, we tried to deny that Amazon or those types of sites were our competitors, right? Or we wouldn't have the budget. But the reality is that's where our communities are. And so they are going to be our competitors. And so that's one of the struggles, I think, certainly as small staffs that we're facing right now is the technological expertise that is expected to come out of our associations is the same, regardless of our size. And so being able to not only be nimble with our ideas, but we need to be able to deliver on platforms that are the expectation of the greater community. And so that's one of the things I think we are certainly always focusing on is how can we do it affordably and without having that in-house technological staff. And there are certainly ways to do it. I think we're struggling certainly because we don't have experts in every department, and we are faced with this continuous change in regulatory compliance. So how do you stay on top of that as a small staff? This year, some banking rules were changing. We're a virtual organization. We don't have a finance person per se on staff. How do you stay on top of that? But at the same time, right, because we're only 8, we actually are an incredibly nimble and innovative group. And one of the things that we are constantly trying to balance is how do we not outpace our board? We can change quickly, we can innovate. Our staff is often talking about foresight. And even though we're facing those regulatory and technical things, we can create a new program from scratch in a handful of months. It's a lot easier for our association, but how do we make sure that we are not outpacing our board, that our board is following along with us and a partner with us on our strategy and our operations, and that our operations don't outpace the strategy of the board. So how do we really work together? I think that's something that small staffs are really focusing on right now. And we're currently going through a governance modernization, which we think will be essential to keep us all aligned there. And then, when you only have 8 staff or less, that succession planning and talent management is really key for us. We don't have a lot of duplicity in the work that we're doing. And so how do you make sure that if somebody needs to go out on leave, that there's structures to support the work that they're doing, or if somebody moves on to a great new opportunity, how do you fill that spot quickly and not have it kind of crush the organization because an eighth of your team is out or needing to get on board, and that takes some time to do well, that you're still operating and maintaining the standards you need to for your community.
So you mentioned that you're looking at some governance reorganization. I realize that it always takes a lot of time to do that. So
Sure does.
can you tell us a little bit about the why of it, if not the specifics? Because I understand you have internal issues, but I'm interested in why you're looking at this and why you think it's essential in the environment we're now in.
Yeah, as you said, Michael, it does take quite a bit of time, right? Organizational change, culture change, if you want it to stick, I think, needs to be incredibly thoughtful. And for most of our members, is an incredibly emotional experience. It's not just the infrastructure piece, which is much easier to change. But for us, we are actually at the tail end of a 5-year strategic plan. It started in 2020, but when we went through that strategic planning process, part of the step that we took was to really ensure that we had the infrastructure, the policies, and the procedures that would allow us to be successful in that strategic plan. The ideas were fantastic, but if we didn't have the right people in the right positions to do that work, were we going to be able to execute it successfully? You add the implications of the last few years of turbulence, whether it happened to be COVID or AI or any of those changing technologies, it means our structures really needed to change. And so what we're going through now is a process to make sure we have a more nimble governance structure that is not reliant on huge sweeping governance changes that happen, every 25 or 30 years. We are trying to restructure our governance to be more forward thinking and to ensure that part of this restructuring allows us to be continuously evolving the governance and not waiting to take whole scale changes and trying to embed them. And so one of the things that we will be doing as we roll out these changes, which includes reducing the size of our board, updating our nominations and vetting processes, changing our elections process to align with our DEI values, but also making sure that we are instituting a governance task force that is looking at and evaluating it constantly so we can continue to make tweaks and understand what small tweaks impacts are instead of trying to evaluate a whole scale governance change kind of in the scheme of a 20-year change. And so we want to make sure we're just constantly recalibrating with the environment, a few changes at a time instead of a whole scale change long term.
Would it be safe to say that you're trying to create a governance that's adaptable to changing times rather than the big problems some organizations go through with redrafting bylaws and so forth and so on? Am I on target?
That's certainly the goal, Michael. We have not fully executed it yet, and it's in process. But so far, that is where we are headed, and we are seeing indicators of success towards that goal.
That's great. One of the really interesting things about Currie is that you deal with undergraduates as well as those that mentor and serve that community. So this alpha generation, people born in the 21st century. These are people you're dealing with right now. And many of our associations, this is a real struggle for them. What do you think you're learning about, quote, the alpha generation that can help associations in general?
Yeah, Michael, I do have the pleasure, and I will in just a few weeks get to spend a few days with 4,000 undergraduates, and that's one of the best things of my job is getting to spend time with them. Um, they are our hope, right? They are our future. That is how I see it, and see it as an opportunity to really challenge my perspective. It's great that I have 20 years of association experience, and yet at the same time that's a singular experience, but they want to care about what they do. They want to be able to be their whole selves in everything they do, right? They want to be taken seriously. For them, flexibility is not optional, it's expected, right? They understand the technical world in a way that we don't. And honestly, they don't have patience for us not doing the work we need to do to be technically savvy. And I don't blame them, right? That they really embrace and celebrate change and evolution in a faster pace way than we do. That's what they expect. They have lived in a world where technology was constantly changing. It was not years and decades between technological advances. Times it was, years and weeks and months. And so they are so much more adaptable and nimble than we are. And we have so much we can learn from them, but they have so much hope, and dedication to the causes of the things that they believe in. And again, it doesn't stick in boxes for them, right? Their whole selves come to everything they do. And I think there's a lot to learn from them. The other thing they're super good at, right, is drawing boundaries. We are not particularly good at we run ourselves into the ground. And I think it's something that we can really learn from them because our long-term health depends upon these boundaries and being able to be flexible and be our whole selves in these places. And so I love to spend some time with them to just see this alternative approach and mindset to how we can see work and our experience as humans. To them, it's just one experience. To us, we kind of have been trying to segment this work-life balance. And that's not how it's going to be successful. Like, how do we integrate these things into a much more healthier mindset?
That's very interesting. One of the interesting elements of this new generation is its demographics. It's very different, particularly when I grew up. I have a few years on all these people, more than a few, as a matter of fact. So, if anybody reads the statistics, we know that it's a changing demographic environment. And actualizing DEI with staff and volunteers and with governing boards is really no easy task, no matter how important it might be. So what steps do you see for associations trying to realize the issues and dynamics of DEI and the significant demographic alterations that the newer generation brings to play?
Yeah, and I think it gets even more complex, Michael, when you overlay the industry or profession that you are serving, because they come with their own complexities. And some of that is we often use the acronym DEI and have our own personal perceptions about what that means. And we often skip the step of defining what DEI means to our group, right? And so are we all starting from the same place? This is what I've seen as a stumbling block and a barrier is we're using the acronym and yet it is meaning different things and we're not validating the alignment. And this is where our ability to move forward really becomes stagnant. And complex and complicated because we all are trying to do different things. We're trying to resource it differently because DEI has such an opportunity to mean so many things to so many different groups. And so I think the first step, and it's something that the Kerr Board has really dedicated itself to this year, is ensuring that we are aligned with what that means for our community first and foremost. And then you can start doing the work, right? Determining if you're resourced correctly to get to the end goal that you'd like to have, making sure that you're trained, that you have both the people and financial resources to do that work. But until you have that clear understanding of what your values are and priorities are, you can't get there, right? And so, are we talking about race? Are we talking about ethnicity? Are we talking about neurodiversity? Are we talking about, right? What does it mean for your industry, for your profession, for your association, not just for you personally? And do we have a shared value that we are moving forward? And I think that's work takes time. It's emotional for a lot of the folks. And trying to do that without the infrastructure and supports of an expert guiding you along, I think is really tricky. This is one of those places where, as a small staff, it is essential to bring in that outside expertise to get us through. It is hard for me to be a participant and a facilitator, and I'm not an expert in this. I certainly have some personal interest and experience, but that is limited, right? And so how do you bring in that voice to help you really guide through these essential conversations and help you establish what is reasonable timelines? There's a lot of work to do, and we all want it done yesterday. But again, that kind of sustainability work here, I think, really takes a lot of infrastructure and time to do it well. And having that external guide to walk you through it, I think, is really helpful.
Society has been somewhat pushing back on DEI. We certainly see that in the for-profit work. And I have been watching this and think that one of the issues that those negative individuals towards the idea seize on is a numbers count. They want to make it, well, how many of this? Do we have the right racial background? And of course, you've expanded it way out more than just race and ethnicity. I'm wondering if you see that in the association community, this number counting versus legitimate inclusion in the area of DEI.
I certainly see it with some of our peers, Michael. To date, our association, one of the things that we are realistic about is what our capacity is around data. And because of security purposes and staff capacity, we actually don't pull individualized data on our members. And to some extent, it has taken that ratio out of the equation, right? We're talking about, do we align with our values? Are we seeing the community participate? Is it a welcoming space first, right? And I think the data will come later, but we are not starting with the data first. It has worked for our group. It might not work for all groups. And so we didn't want to define people by a number, right? That is against the whole concept of having these DEI values. And sometimes that is what we see, is that the DEI is then defined by a number. And if you hit a certain threshold, that means you were successful. Well, you could have hit that threshold and still not have these values and welcoming environment. And so we didn't want that to be our measure. And so I would challenge people to really determine, what is your measure and why are you using that as a measure? Sometimes the data isn't an easy thing to measure. The counts are easy, but is it really getting you to where you need to be? And that's where I think working with an expert in the space can be really helpful to help you determine what you need for your space. At least for us right now, that has been successful. And it may not be the thing forever. And that's where I think it goes back to this, at least for us, small staff, nimble, flexible mindset. We recognize what we do today might not be right for tomorrow, but it's what we can and want to do now. And we reevaluate it next go around. Assessment is part of everything we do. And we don't ever anticipate even a single program being the same as the last time, right? And so I think your work in DEI and all your strategic initiatives should be the same, right? Constantly evaluating whether it's still on point for what your community and the world needs.
In addition to DEI, you just brought up a very interesting point about organizations being, flexible, adaptable, and so forth, and what they do with their programs. And you said, well, you can't really do the same thing year after year after year, or program after program after program. But the organizations, the associations are often very tradition bound. And I'm wondering, how you work through what are some good traditions versus the need to regenerate, rethink, reflect, and make additions to the programs that are offered.
Michael, I think it's mindset, right? To me, the tradition is the people coming together. The tradition is building the community. The tradition is connecting, and the tool might change. The tool needs to change with the environment, with the audience you're serving, and to some extent, if you are always evolving, the tradition is the box, right? So our annual conference is called Connect UR. Connect UR is always going to be the tradition. What is in the box changes every year, right? But there's always going to be some element of connecting, but it's gonna look different every year. And because we don't ever do it the same, our members tend to not get overly tied to something because they've only ever seen it once, and we evolve it for the next go around. And so some of the things that they hold on to is our own doing. And so how can we help guide them through and be a safe space for them to test and pilot things? Now, there are, just like all associations, some of those kind of sacred cow things that we're still trying to bring them along with. But the more that you can just get them used to focusing on what the goal is instead of the tool has been successful for us.
Well, that's actually good to hear. One of the things I wanted to explore with you is director education, meaning board education. There's a phrase I often use when I work with boards. I say, everybody wants to learn, but they often don't want to be taught. And of course, you're working in a professional association where, people are degreed, they're smart, they know their business, they know their discipline very well. Because they know their discipline, however, does not mean that they necessarily know how to run or be a director of an association. So as the chief executive officer in your organization, how do you balance that out? How do you work with your board so that we honor their expertise and we help them know more about what it means to be a director of an association?
Yeah. Michael, sometimes it's as simple as how we choose to frame it. One of the things we instituted 3 years ago was at the start of every board meeting, we have some kind of training element. So it's either an expert from the industry coming to talk about a topic that is top of mind for the board. We have somebody coming to talk and give guidance around their fiduciary responsibilities. Right this year, we have a DEI expert facilitating us through conversations. The first year we called it training, Michael. It did not fly, right? We changed it to development, and it was received in such a different way, right? And so I think we need to work with them and show them that it's adding value to them as professionals, not just here in the space of PER, but these are skills that they're going to be able to take back to the work that they're doing, has become much more valuable. Now, I think we went from, 50-50 to maybe more 80-20. There's still going to be some people that want to talk about napkin colors or the location of your conference. Sure. But when you make them the 20% instead of the 50%, it's a lot easier to steer that conversation someplace different. So that's part of it, right? This training and development sessions that we've been running have been incredibly helpful. But the other thing is, and I think we need to be realistic, because associations are now changing on such a different pace and speed, really rethinking what board work looks like. And we have been spending considerable time in the foresight space and bringing our board along there. And part of that is, yes, we can't take away their fiduciary roles. That is essential to board duty, sure. But the more impactful part is that foresight work. And again, some of this has gone down to framing for us. When we first, introduced them to foresight, oh, what the heck is this? I don't have a crystal ball. I don't want to be predicting the future, right? And instead, when we started framing it about being able to solve what is keeping our members up at night, when we started talking about shaping the future of the profession, well, those are things they want to do. They want to have an impact on the association. They want to have an impact on the profession. And so their interpretation of that work has changed as we've adapted how we frame this foresight work to them and shown them what the impacts of introducing some of those things are. So 4 years ago, we introduced a new investment policy statement, which included a portion of our endowment being focused on opportunity funds. We gave a specific bundle of money just so we can do research and development, just so we can invest in the future, because our year-to-year budget was never going to be able to cover that kind of work. We are starting to see the results of the first spends of those dollars on impacts on the association. And so for them to start seeing what is a realistic turnaround time for these things, that it's not going to be overnight, that they need to have the longer view, but now they can start to see it working and have examples to show boards that follow behind them, has been really valuable. And so we're trying to really harness what they're experts at. They're experts on the industry. Okay, how do we turn that into something that's impactful for our strategy? And that's really this foresight work.
One of the things that I really like about the whole concept of foresight is that if done well, it eliminates some of the short-term decisions that cause long-term problems. And you just articulated a perfect example of an investment that you're making on an annual basis. Now, 3-4 years down the road, people say, wow, this really works. And it's good for us to see boards becoming comfortable with that idea. So congratulations to you and Carl.
Comfort is a work in progress, Michael, right? But we are now not holding it out like a dirty diaper, right? Like it's a little bit closer. And again, I think we often don't have realistic expectations for what change management should look like. How long do these changes need to take? What is reasonable? And we started kind of a slower change process, something that Sharon Kneebone talked to me about when I was becoming an executive for the first time. Sometimes you have to move slow to move fast, right? And so in the beginning, the governance changes were slower. The introduction to training was slower. The introduction to foresight was slower. And as they have started to get it, now all of a sudden they're moving fast. And we're actually getting to our end goal much more quickly. But because we didn't shove it all down their throats all at one time or all in the beginning, and we're trying to thread the needle and bring them along with us, has been much more successful. But balancing out what that change looks like and what you introduce when and in what cycle, sometimes it seems immediate for the staff. And how do you help them understand that your board only meets 4 times a year and there's already 2 big agenda items that adding this in, now is not so great. Let's wait 3 months, and it actually might pass if we wait 3 months versus trying to plug it in now and end up not being able to bring it up for another year, right? And so I think that change management, both how do you communicate it to your staff, how do you work your board through it, setting those expectations, that's where I think I spent a lot more time than I had ever anticipated, right, going into a role like this.
Well, one more question that is about the small staff association, and that is, there are a lot of things that small staff executives can actually teach the larger associations. But you know, in our world, big sometimes just gets a chance to say more than small. It's unfortunate. What do you think the small association executive can really offer to large staff association executives that maybe others don't see in our community?
You just want one thing, Michael?
Well,
Right? Like,
you can go on. It's fine by me.
no, I think just like with our boards, right? We are all, or at least I would like to think we are all partners in this space. Just like we can learn from the alpha generation, right? The learning needs to go bi-directionally. There's certainly lots of things that I see at large staffs, and it's like, okay, how can I do that for less? Because you often can. And we have a really fabulous staff here at Kerr, but not all of them have always worked at small staffs. And for example, we have the director of our education and content who was recently putting a plan together. And she was like, it's amazing. I used to do the same thing at a large staff for almost 100 times the budget. And I would have never thought there were these alternatives to do it more efficiently, effectively, and impactfully. And she's just seeing it in one little area, right? And so why are we saying, oh, it always has to cost this much? Because we're not really evaluating all the things we're doing. And so sometimes I think what small staffs are really great at is assessing quickly, because we don't have these ideas of huge data sets or focus groups, because it's not even an option to us. It would be nice, but sometimes actually it can be a stumbling block. I can go and talk to 10 members pretty quickly. I can look at our survey results and immediately change, right? We don't have red tape. We don't have 7 layers of things for things to get approved. And so how can they test innovation on a small scale, or how can they pilot things? I think one of the things we are fabulous at is piloting idea. It's 80% baked, sometimes it's 60% baked. And how do you test it out? I think what I see at large staffs often is it always has to be so polished before it launches. And sometimes then you become so attached to it, it's hard to change it. Whereas we're changing it as we're building it. We launched an event 2 years ago. It went live for registration, and the event wasn't really built yet. We had a concept and we were building it as we went along. And the feedback was fabulous. And certainly we tweaked the event the next year around, and we're going into the 3rd year and it's going to be tweaked again. But to me, the event should always be tweaked. We didn't get it right the first time and it never needs to change again. And so what is your mindset about what success looks like is something that maybe could be one of those things that large staff takes from small staff. Success, maybe isn't the perfect launch of a perfect program that will hold forevermore into the future. Can it be something that is constantly evolving as you go along?
Yeah, one of the books that I happen to like has the title "Sometimes We Win, Sometimes We Learn." And I think that's what you're demonstrating here. And we'll figure it out. That's if we waited for everything to be perfect, we'd get nothing done. So as we wrap up, Lindsay, first I want to offer you my thanks for coming on and being one of those executives that's willing to share what they've learned and to offer ideas as well as learn as they go. If someone wants to reach you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you, Lindsay?
I am a great user of LinkedIn. And so it's first name, last name on LinkedIn. I think you can use the LinkedIn website, just / Lindsay Currie, and you will find me. And I'd be happy to connect with you all there and continue the conversation about associations.
Well, thank you again for joining us today. And friends, Associations Futures is intended to be a forward-thinking podcast that delves into the future of associations. Our mission is to help associations navigate the ever-evolving landscape by anticipating trends, avoiding short-sighted decisions, and ensuring long-term success. So tune in again to gain insights, foresight, and actionable strategies for your association's journey. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us.